Hey guys, tonight we're crawling into a place where the wind slices across the plains like a knife. The stars hang low and endless, and smoke curls lazily out of a single open flap in the ceiling. You're about to spend a winter night in a tipi with nothing but animal hides, firewood, and your own stubbornness. And let's be honest, we probably wouldn't survive this without the tricks native families perfected over centuries. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull the flap aside and duck in. Warm, smoky air greets you, instantly different from the brutal cold outside. The Tipis walls glow with the fire's heartbeat. That orange rhythm flickering over hides stretched tight around a framework of long poles. The scent is everything smoke, tanned hide, pine resin, maybe a faint whiff of cooked fat. You sit cross-legged near the fire, and for a moment, you forget that the temperature outside could freeze a horse's whiskers out here. Warmth doesn't come from thick walls or electric heaters. It comes from knowing exactly how to make nature work with you instead of against you. The tipi's cone shape funnels heat back down. The hides breathe just enough to let moisture escape, and the small fire burns steady at the center. You can actually hear the draft hum softly through the top vent, like the tipi's lungs exhaling. Historians still argue whether the earliest plains tipis were designed specifically for cold resistance, or if that was a happy accident of geometry. Either way, you're grateful tonight that some ancestor decided, yeah, let's go cone-shaped. You huddle closer to the flames, knowing the whole design depends on balance too much smoke. You choke. Too little air, the fire dies. Your fingertips brush against the hide wall. It's cool, but not icy. Beneath your palm, you can feel the faint tremor of the wind outside, trying to pry its way in and failing. The hides, usually bison, are layered with careful seams, greased and cured until they shrugged off moisture. They hold warmth in like a thermos, and the shake. Pure genius. The conical form sheds wind from every direction, so instead of battering the structure, gusts glide up and over. You imagine the same principle at work on a modern camping tent, except this one was invented hundreds of years before nylon was even a concept. You stretch your legs out, careful not to bump the fire pit. The flames throw shadows of the poles up the curved wall 15. Maybe 20 of them, all meeting at the top, like fingers in prayer. Each pole was chosen for strength and flexibility, usually lodgepole, pine, or cedar, smoothed by hand. A mainstream fact most people forget. These poles could last years. It's carried from place to place, while the hides were replaced seasonally as herds provided new material. The whole structure could be dismantled in under an hour. Imagine taking your entire house apart before breakfast. A dog shifts outside, its collar of bone beads rattling faintly. You think about the strange irony that these homes were designed for movement, built by people who were never truly homeless. You can almost hear the teasing tone of a Lakota grandmother explaining to you. Why freeze in one place when the bison moves south? Inside, you notice how the heat rises, swirls, then finds its escape through the smoke hole at the top. The flap openings are adjusted by cords tied to the ancient engineering that even modern Kadiks admire for its simplicity. And yet, the setup isn't foolproof. One wrong flap angle, and the tipi turns into a smokehouse. It's said some tribes could read wind direction just by watching the fire's behavior. You're starting to believe it. There's a fringe tidbit whispered among anthropologists, that some families intentionally kept a small layer of fine ash scattered on the floor. It caught stray sparks and supposedly reflected heat better than bare earth. Maybe superstition, maybe thermal science before science had a name. Either way, it makes sense. You look down the ground inside this tipi has a certain gray shimmer. The soundscape shifts as the wind picks up outside. It hits the tippy, whirls, and slides off. The hides creak, but hold. Somewhere beyond the glow, snowflakes might be falling silently, piling around the base to add an accidental layer of insulation. You realize the tippy isn't just resisting the cold, it's using it. Snow drifted around the edges becomes a seal. Nature's own caulking. You glance toward the doorway, low, rounded flap with a hide cover that doubles as insulation. It's always facing east, toward the sunrise. That's not just symbolic. It's practical. Morning light warms the entrance first, drying out dew and chasing off any lingering chill. Historians still debate whether this alignment was purely ritual or also thermodynamic strategy. Maybe both. When survival meets spirituality, those lines blur. The fire crackles as someone maybe you odds another stick of pine. The resin pops, sending sparks swirling upward. The air tastes faintly of wood smoke and charred sap. You think about how fragile this comfort is. Without constant tending, the fire dies, the cold creeps in. And all this clever geometry means nothing. For a moment, you close your eyes. You can hear soft breathing around you, others already drifting towards sleep. Maybe a child wrapped in furs near the wall, a mother humming under her breath, an elder snoring quietly beside the fire. The tippy becomes more than shelter. It's a heartbeat, shared breath of warmth against the endless night outside. Your mind drifts toward comparison. Modern people pay extra for glamping setups with faux fur blankets and portable heaters. Yet, here, centuries ago, the real thing already existed. Minimal gear, maximum efficiency. You almost want to whisper to your sleeping companions. You were doing sustainable living before hashtags existed. Another joke sneaks into your tired mind. If survival here required Wi-Fi, the plains would have been empty. Instead, the only signal was the smoke twisting into the night sky, carrying whispers to the stars dot outside. Coyotes sing. Inside, the tippy hums quietly with the rhythm of embers and breathing. You start to realize that warmth isn't just physical, it's communal. The architecture is part engineering, part philosophy. Stay close, share heat, move with the land. Don't fight the world, flow with it. You feel your own modern anxieties melt away with each flicker of the fire. Bills, notifications, deadlines, they don't exist here. Only the steady dance of survival and sleep. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you imagine the next layer of wisdom, how this ingenious design actually came to be, and why each pole, each hide seam had a purpose beyond beauty. But for now, you just breathe in the smoky warmth and listen. The tippy creaks, the fire sighs, and the night outside forgets to be cruel for a little while. The fire's warmth lingers through the dim hours, pulsing gently against your skin like a living thing. When dawn blushes the hide walls, you're already half awake. Watching the tippy shape reveal itself in the growing light, you start to notice the genius of it, not just as a cozy tent, but as a masterclass in aerodynamic architecture centuries ahead of its time. You stretch your legs, glance up at the peak where the poles meet, and realize how perfectly proportioned the structure is. The tippy isn't some random pile of sticks. It's an intentional geometry lesson. Each pole leans inward at just the right angle so the hide covering doesn't buckle under wind pressure. The conical design acts like a natural wind deflector when icy gusts whip across the plains. They're guided smoothly around the tippy instead of smashing straight into it. You can almost picture a 3D airflow simulation, except the engineers here were generations of people learning through instinct, observation, and maybe a few collapsed prototypes. A mainstream fact comes to mind. Most plains tipis averaged around 12 to 15 feet tall, though some ceremonial ones stretched twice that. That height wasn't random, it allowed smoke to rise above sleeping heads while keeping the lower layer warm and breathable. The upper vent worked like a primitive chimney, tuned by movable flaps. Even modern architects marveled at how a structure with no nails, no screws, and No insulation could regulate heat and airflow so efficiently. You shift closer to one of the poles. The wood smells faintly of resin and age. Every tipi pole was chosen with care, usually from straight, slender lodgepole pines found miles away in mountain forest. Some tribes, like the Blackfoot, carried their precious poles from camp to camp, a symbol of home that outlasted hides and seasons. Imagine trekking across frozen plains, dragging the skeletal promise of your next house behind you. There's a small debate among historians about how those poles were prepared. Some believe they were peeled and smoothed completely to prevent sap from seeping through the hides, while others argue a bit of bark was left for texture and grip. You can't help picturing two ancient carpenters bickering over Team Smooth versus Team Rough centuries before Reddit was invented. A fringe tidbit circulates among anthropologists that some poles were occasionally rubbed with bear fat or animal marrow to repel insects and moisture. The idea sounds messy, but in a land where rain could freeze overnight, it probably made sense. And maybe it added a certain shine under the firelight. You sniff the air, wondering if that faint, sweet tang in the wood is just smoke or old traditions lingering. You crawl toward the edge of the tipi and lift the bottom flap just enough to peek outside. The dawn light is crisp, painting the snow in pale gold. The outer shape of the tipi stands tall and serene, its shadow stretching across the frosted ground. You notice how the base flares slightly outward, a design trick that keeps snow from piling against the wall. The lower heights overlap in a way that channels rainwater downward and away from the interior. Modern architects would call this drainage efficiency. To the people who built it, it was simply survival. You duck back inside before the chill steals too much warmth. The flap falls closed with a soft thump, and instantly, the difference is obvious. The cone shape doesn't just deflect wind, it compresses heat back down into the center. Every surface inside seems to glow faintly from the fire's reflected light. You realize that the tipi is like a living organism. It inhales cold air from the ground edge, exhales smoke from the top, and keeps a steady, body temperature inside. Historians still argue whether the tipi's conical perfection evolved gradually or was borrowed from older, perhaps forgotten structures. Some think the inspiration came from observing natural forms, mountains, anthills, even the tapered nests of certain birds. Others insist it was pure human ingenuity refined over countless winters. Either way, standing inside one feels like being held in the palm of a design philosophy older than written language. You settle back near the fire, tracing the angles with your eyes. The poles cross near the top, forming a kind of skeletal crown. Two of them extend just past the peak, tied with a single thong of hide. These are the smoke flaps you saw last night. By adjusting ropes tied to these poles from inside, anyone could shift how the flaps opened, fine-tuning the airflow like vents in a modern HVAC system. And they did it all without a single blueprint. There's a joke forming in your sleepy brain. If IKEA made a tipi kit, it would probably take 4 hours and 3 arguments to assemble. But these builders could raise one in 30 minutes flat, with everything aligned to the sun, the stars, and the wind's invisible dance. The structure's symmetry also served another purpose: strength through flexibility. Instead of fighting the wind, the tipi swayed with it. The poles were slightly elastic, bending just enough to absorb gusts. You can feel that now as a fresh wind brushes past. The walls flex, creak, and then relax again. Nothing cracks. The energy dissipates. The tipi survives. You imagine the builders at work on a cold morning, hands numb but precise, their motions practiced and silent. A tripod of poles, first tied near the top, lifted as one like the opening of a giant umbrella. Then more poles added around, evenly spaced. The hides, once softened and smoked, would be draped around in overlapping panels, pinned and pegged into place. It's said that some experienced women could read the tension of a hide by touch along too tight, and it might split to loose, and the wind would hum through the gaps. The Tipis frame was a collaboration between humans and materials, between muscle and mathematics. You could almost sense the rhythm of a teach pole leaned at about a 60-degree angle, giving the cone its elegant slope. The base circle had to be wide enough to fit the whole family, yet compact enough to trap warmth. It was geometry tuned by survival, not spreadsheets. A whisper of cold air sneaks through the base, brushing your ankle. It's not unpleasant. It feeds the fire's breath. You think of how many modern homes seal themselves airtight, then rely on machines to push stale air around. The Tipi did that naturally, its slight drafts keeping oxygen fresh and humidity low. In a way, it wasn't just a home, it was a living lung. You reach up, its fingertips grazing a hanging object to charm of feathers and bone. Swaying from one of the cross poles, its shadow dances across the hides like smoke. Maybe it's a wind charm, or maybe just decoration. Either way, it feels like proof that even in engineering, the spiritual had its place. You imagine stepping outside now, watching dozens of Tipis scattered across a snow-covered plain. Each one angled just right, each one breathing smoke into the sky. Together, they'd look like a constellation of warm stars on the ground. Everyone built from the same simple genius. A few poles, some hides, and the will to stay alive in a place that didn't care if you froze. You let the thought settle like falling snow. The Tipis design isn't just clever, it's humble. It doesn't conquer the weather. It collaborates with it. You tuck that idea somewhere deep, thinking maybe that's the real wisdom worth carrying into the modern world. The fire pops again, one spark leaping up toward the peak before fading into the dawn's light. The smoke curls smoothly out of the vent, and as you watch it rise, you understand every pole, every angle, every knot of sinew here has one purpose: to make the impossible comfortable. You lean closer to the wall again, tracing the way the hides overlap, smooth, supple, warm to the touch. Last night, you admired the Tipi shape, but now you start to think about its skin. Those hides are more than walls. They're a second body, holding heat like muscle and memory. Without them, the Tipi would be a skeleton in the cold. The hides, most often bison, are thick enough to deflect icy wind and still breathe. You can almost feel the texture under your fingertips. A little rough on the outside, soft inside where it's been scraped and smoked. Each one carries faint scars, lines from the animal's life, now turned into the pattern of survival for yours. The mainstream fact hits you. A single large Tipi might use 12 to 20 full bison hides, each carefully prepared, stitched, edge to edge. That's not just craftsmanship. It's an economy of labor, ecology, and timing. You picture the process. After a hunt, the hides are skinned and stretched on wooden frames. Women work them with bone scrapers, removing flesh and membrane until only pure, thick hide remains. Then comes the step that smells unforgettable: brain tanning. The brain of the same animal, yes, cured, that rights mixed with water and massaged into the hide, saturating it with oils that soften and preserve it. One brain for one hide, a perfect biological symmetry that's both practical and a little poetic. Somewhere between science and ritual. You grin at the thought. If modern leather conditioners came labeled organic bison brain, half the internet would be both fascinated and horrified. But this technique made hides that stayed soft in freezing weather and didn't crack. The brain oils formed a natural waterproofing layer that kept snow and rain from seeping through. And when smoked afterward, the hides gained their signature tan hue and faintly sweet scent, the smell that fills this Tipi even now. You look around and realize something subtle. The walls aren't a single sheet. They're panels sewn together with sinew thread, each overlapping slightly, creating invisible seams that flex with wind but never gape. Historians still argue whether different tribes, preferred clockwise or counterclockwise overlap, some say. It depended on prevailing winds. Others think it carried ceremonial meaning. Either way, that spiral pattern gives the tipi its subtle twist, helping rain slide off instead of pooling. As you sit there, you imagine the effort behind each hide. It's not just about warmth. It's a community effort involving hunters, tanners, and sewers. The hides are heavy, sometimes 40 pounds each. Transporting, softening, and fitting them perfectly takes coordination bordering on art. You wonder if those teams of women joked or sang as they worked, their hands rhythmic, their laughter carrying across the camp. There's something almost musical about repetitive work done together. It turns survival into ceremony. And here comes a quirky, fringe tidbit. In some oral accounts, it's said that certain tanners whispered small charms or songs to each hide, believing that kindness during preparation would make the lodge more comfortable and less moody. A well-tanned hide wouldn't stiffen or make noises in the night, they said, if it had been treated gently. You smile anthropologists might roll their eyes, but who wouldn't want a happier wall when it's 40 below? The smoke above swirls lazily toward the vent, curling in soft ribbons. You imagine how the hide's texture helps this airflow, their pores balancing moisture like a living thing. Unlike plastic or canvas, they breathe. That's why it doesn't smell musty inside, despite constant smoke. The walls inhale and exhale right along with you. Outside, a soft wind sighs brushing against the tipi's hide. You can hear it whisper over the seams, a low, steady hum. That sound is the conversation between hide and air, proof that nothing here fights nature outright. It works with it. You think about what would happen if you stripped away those hides. The skeleton of poles would stand bare, vulnerable, beautiful, but useless. The hides are what make the structure a home. You could say they're the tipi salor, at least its coat. And like any good coat, it requires maintenance every few months. Small tiers get repaired, seams re-smoked, and edges greased with animal fat to stay supple. There's a memory. Maybe not yours, but borrowed from somewhere deep. Hands working by firelight, pressing warm fat along the seam, humming softly. That's how warmth was maintained, not by waiting for technology, but by participating in it daily. You look again at the inside of the wall. The hides overlap downward like shingles on a roof. Rain hits, slides down, and drips harmlessly away. Snow piles outside, sealing the bottom edge naturally. You realize you're looking at centuries of trial and error solved with elegance. No metal nails, no plastic lining, no instructions, just understanding. The historians still argue about whether certain tribes used 2 layers of hide in the deepest winter. Some evidence suggests double wrapping, the equivalent of putting a jacket over a sweater, was common among Northern Plains groups. Others think that's a romantic exaggeration by early settlers. But if you could step outside and feel that cutting wind, you'd probably vote in favor of extra layers. 2. You notice a few decorative touches, painted circles and streaks of red ochre fading along the inside. They aren't just for looks. The pigments, natural minerals, may have added a slight waterproofing or even insect deterrents, depending on the mixture. A scientific bonus born from spiritual art. You trace a small symbol with your fingertip, half guessing its meaning. Maybe it's a clan mark, maybe a personal story, maybe just don't touch this part, it leaks. You find yourself wondering about the color of the world outside before dye. Every pigment here red from clay, yellow from roots, black from soot, was gathered and mixed by hand. When the hide covering glowed in firelight, those pigments shimmered faintly, turning the tipi into a living lantern. At night, people passing outside might see shadow plays of movement inside someone stretching, a child turning, a hand lifting to feed the fire. Privacy wasn't perfect, but comfort was sacred. Another small joke bubbles up as you think of those flickering silhouettes. You'd call it prehistoric shadow theater. Some families might have told stories that way, letting the fire cast animals and spirits against the wall. if bedtime needed entertainment. You didn't need Netflix, just a good imagination and a bright enough flame. As the morning grows, a golden stripe of sunlight slips through the vent and paints a warm stripe along the hide. You watch it move, slow and soft, marking time like a sundial. The bison hides glow honey gold, every pore catching the light. The tipi becomes not just a shelter, but a filter for the sun itself. And in that glow, you think about how this same system of hides and poles moved endlessly across the plains packed, rolled, rebuilt, never wasted. A sustainable cycle before that word ever existed. When a hide wore thin, it became a robe or a sleeping mat. When a pole cracked, it was firewood. Every piece had a second life waiting. You lean back and breathe in the faint smell of smoke and hide. It's rich, earthy, oddly comforting. You realize you're not just learning how they slept warm, you're learning how nothing was separate. Food, shelter, ceremony, and sleep all shared the same materials, the same rhythms. Outside, the wind quiets. Inside, the hides murmur gently, content in their role as the tipi's living skin. You can almost hear them say, "See, warmth isn't about what you have, it's about how you use what the world gives you." You wake again to the soft groan of hide stretching as the morning chill tightens it. The tipi giving a sleepy sigh like it's alive. You blink through the lingering smoke haze, the last embers pulsing red, and you notice how perfectly the seams meet overhead, those lines of strength holding the whole world together. You start thinking, if the hides are the tipi skin, then the stitching is its heartbeat. Every thread, every overlap, and every flap is part of the living system that keeps this fragile bubble of warmth intact against a sky that doesn't care. You crawl closer to the wall to look at the sewing. Up close, it's astonishing. No sloppy stitches, no frayed ends. The seams are tight, sometimes even doubled where the tension is greatest. Most of this was done with sinew tendon fibers from animals, dried, split, and softened. It's a mainstream fact that sinew thread expands slightly when wet, then contracts as it dries, sealing holes naturally. Basically, nature invented waterproof zippers before humanity thought of them. You tug gently on a seam, feeling how solid it is, and suddenly you understand how all of this stays together through blizzards and storms. But the overlapping hides aren't all stitched flat. They're layered, so the outer edge always overlaps downward, like feathers or roof tiles. That pattern isn't decorative, it's aerodynamic. When rain or snow slides down, it flows off seamlessly without finding a single edge to creep under. The seam lines spiral slightly, forming a soft twist that helps wind pass around the tipi rather than push directly against it. You can almost picture early builders testing it in windstorms, adjusting a flap here, a seam there, till it was perfect. And then there are the flaps themselves, the unsung heroes of tipi engineering. Two large triangular panels near the top, controlled by long poles tied with hide thongs. By adjusting them, you can open or close the smoke hole. Last night, you watched smoke curl through that opening. Now, in daylight, you see how precise the setup is. The flaps can pivot like giant eyelids, squinting against the wind or opening wide to let smoke escape. Historians still argue whether those flaps were first designed purely for smoke or also to manipulate pressure and airflow. Some think the builders understood the Bernoulli effect long before anyone named it, that a strong updraft over the vent could draw smoke out faster. Others think it was intuitive trial and error. Either way, it works. You sit watching smoke drift upward, hit the vent, and vanish cleanly into the pale sky. The sewing of those flaps is particularly neat, reinforced with extra sinew and sometimes edged with rawhide strips to prevent curling. When strong winds blow, the flaps can be pulled, taut, or even folded down entirely, sealing the top. You imagine a blizzard sweeping over the plains, snow hissing like sand. The people inside would tie down the flaps, lower the smoke poles, and the tipi would shrink into a snug cocoon. a quirky tidbit surfaces from somewhere deep in oral history. Some families tied small beads or charms near the flap cords, believing that when the wind whistled through, the charms would talk to the spirits of air. A tiny wind chime, basically both spiritual and practical, since you could also tell by the sound how strong the gusts were outside. The more it rattled, the tighter you pulled the cords. You reach up to the flap cords hanging nearby. They're smooth, flexible, probably made from rawhide or braided sinew. Pull one slightly, and you hear the subtle creak of tension moving through the structure, the tipi responding like it's alive. It's such a simple mechanism, yet it manages complex ventilation without needing any gears or gadgets. You mutter under your breath, "Eat your heart out, Dyson." As the morning brightens, you can finally see the tiny gaps between hides where the sewing meets. They aren't sealed air-tanned, that's intentional. Those minuscule openings allow just enough air exchange to keep the fire breathing and prevent suffocation. It's controlled imperfection, deliberate looseness. You realize that unlike modern insulation, the goal wasn't to trap every bit of air, it was to maintain balance. Too tight, and the fire would die. Too loose, and the warmth would leak. You grin, imagining a modern architect presenting this in a boardroom. "Gentlemen, we're going for poorest precision, yet here." That concept has existed for centuries, refined by weather. Not WHIT-EBOARDS. As you run your hand along the seam, you find a small ridge of hardened grease. It's animal fat, rubbed along the stitch line to waterproof and preserve the sinew. The smell is faint but pleasant, smoky and earthy. Someone maintained this tipi with care, working that grease in like lotion on dry skin. Maintenance wasn't optional, it was ritual. You can picture hands smoothing the seams, whispering softly, checking every inch before winter came. And then there's that curious engineering trick you hadn't noticed before. The cover isn't one continuous cylinder. It's actually open in the front, overlapping like a coat. That slit allows the doorway to align precisely beneath the east-facing flap. When the tipi is set up, that overlapping seam runs along the back, opposite the door, catching the least amount of wind. It's a natural windbreak, perfectly oriented. And when the season changes or the wind direction shifts, the entire structure can be rotated simply by repositioning the poles. Historians still debate where the Tipis were. Always oriented east for symbolic reasons, the sunrise represented rebirth, or because morning sun dries dew faster on that side. Most likely, it's both. You smile at the duality, spiritual meaning and thermal. It's logic dancing hand in hand. Now you notice a few decorative stitches along one seam-covered threads, probably dyed sinew. They form a zigzag pattern, both pretty and practical. Some tribes use such stitching to tell family stories. Others simply reinforced high tension points. Either way, it's proof that necessity and art never lived far apart here. A breeze sneaks through the vent, swirling smoke around your face. It doesn't sting. Instead, it moves gently, guided upward by the flaps. You start to appreciate just how smart this structure really is. No thermostats, no sensors, just the physics of heat, air, and design perfected through generations of trial. A small joke slips through your thoughts. If humans made an app for this, they'd call it Smoke Sync and charge a subscription. You chuckle quietly, watching the spark drift upward and vanish. The day outside brightens further, shadows shifting across the seams like rivers of light. Every joint, every stitch, every flap feels purposeful. Even the imperfections are deliberate little spaces where air hums, where hide breathes, where the tipi lives. You think back to last night when the wind howled and the tipi stood unmoved. Now you see why. The whole design works like a conversation between opposites, open yet sealed, light yet strong, flexible yet secure. Warmth here isn't a fortress. It's a balance. You lie back on your furs, eyes tracing the spiral of seams up to the vent. It's oddly hypnotic, that pattern of connection threads crossing hides crossing poles, all converging in a single point overhead. You realize that sleeping inside this isn't just physical shelter, it's symbolic of connection itself. Every piece relies on the others. If one fails, the rest feels it. As the fire sighs and smoke whispers out, you let your eyes drift shut again. The Tipis walls murmur softly in the breeze, its flaps adjusting like lungs finding their rhythm. You feel safe in the geometry of warmth, knowing every seam, stitch, and flap has your back literally. You wake to the quietest sound imaginable, the crunch of snow shifting just outside the tippy wall. Inside though, everything feels muffled, soft, cocooned in its own private weather. You pull your blanket tighter and realize something important. Warmth doesn't start with the fire above you. It begins under you. The secret to not freezing out here lies on the ground. You push back your bedding, okay? And the first thing you notice is how layered everything feels beneath your hands. It's not just dirt. The surface has a soft give, like walking on a forest floor. The groundwork here is a science of its own, part insulation, part cushioning, part sheer genius born of bitter nights. The plains may look flat, but under a tipi, the earth is engineered. The first layer is usually grass or reeds dry. Springy, a natural barrier against cold seeping up from frozen soil. Over that come pine boughs or willow twigs, creating a mesh that traps air pockets, the same principle modern sleeping pads use. You press your palm into it. It's surprisingly firm, not lumpy at all. You can feel how it lifts you ever so slightly above the cold. That inch of separation could mean the difference between sleeping soundly and waking frostbitten. On top of that base rest the soft layers, tanned hides, robes, woven mats. You run your hand over one and feel the smooth, velvety surface of smoked bison leather, still faintly warm from last night's fire. It's heavier than any modern sleeping bag, but feels somehow alive, warm, even when untouched. You shift a corner aside and catch the earthy smell of crushed sage mixed into the grass beneath. Historians still argue whether sage was used purely for scent or also as a pest deterrent. Some say it helped keep insects and rodents away. Others think it carried spiritual meaning, a kind of nightly purification. Either way, can't help but think it's the most practical air freshener ever invented. A mainstream fact slides into your mind. Archaeologists have found impressions in old campsite floors that match layered bedding systems. Okay, evidence that this wasn't improvisation. Entire bedding areas were structured like thermal mosaics. The floor is carefully arranged as the poles overhead. You sit back and imagine setting one up yourself. First, clear snow and loose soil. Then pack the ground flat, sometimes even warming it with hot stones before layering insulation. Next comes the grass or reeds, whatever the season allows. In winter, you might use dried buffalo dung, crumbled and spread thinly to add warmth. In summer, soft prairie grasses. Yes, you just heard that right, buffalo dung. Before you wrinkle your nose, it's odorless once dry and insulates like a champ. Call it eco-friendly underfloor heating. You laugh quietly, thinking how your modern camping friends would react if you told them that little trick. Luxury tippy sweet now with premium organic bison chip. Insulation. Okay, you can practically hear the marketing pitch. Hey? Fringe tidbit from oral accounts claims that some camps sprinkled fine sand over the packed earth before layering hides, believing it helped hold heat like an ember. It's probably an early observation of thermal mass, the sand storing daytime warmth and releasing it slowly overnight. You run a finger through a patch near your bedding, and sure enough, there's a thin, gritty layer. Maybe they were right. You stretch out fully now, testing the sleeping space. It feels comfortable in a primitive, grounding way. The hides cushion your shoulders. The pine boughs sigh softly under your weight, and there's no hint of dampness. The tipi isn't just keeping heat in knits, keeping cold out from every direction. You think of it like thermal origami, warmth folded in layers, bottom to top, in one corner. You notice a pile of robes, more bison hides, some edged with fur. At night, these become the blankets. People slept under them, sometimes 2 or 3 layers thick. You can imagine the rhythmic sound of a whole family shifting under hides, the soft rustle like waves on a lake. Body heat, shared and trapped in the folds, amplifies the insulation. One fire, one family, one ground system, it all works together. Historians still debate how much bedding was communal versus individual. Some records suggest families shared giant robes. Others describe single-person wraps, depending on the tribe. Either way, the idea was simple. The ground could take your heat or give it back, depending on how you treated it. You reach over to the edge of the tipi, where the wall meets the floor. The hides extend slightly inward, pinned down by stones or wooden pegs. That small overlap prevents drafts from sneaking in along the base. Snow drifting outside packs naturally around the bottom. Skilling it tighter natures, caulking again. You run your hand along one of the stones, feeling how cold it is, yet how that cold never travels upward. Every layer grass, boughs, hides, breaks the bridge between you and frozen earth. You whisper to yourself, insulation, by instinct, and grin. Another small detail catches your attention near the fire pit. The ground dips slightly, forming a shallow bowl lined with ash and dirt. That's deliberate. The center stays lower than the sleeping edges, allowing cooler air to settle there and feed the fire's draft. Warm air circulates upward and outward, wrapping the sleepers along the walls in a slow spiral of heat. The tipi breathes from the floor up. A quirky custom pops into your memory from some long ago reading. Children were sometimes placed near the outer edge, where it was cooler, while elders slept closer to the fire. Not because of favoritism, but temperature management. Younger bodies handled cooler air better, and elders needed the warmth. Practical wisdom disguised as family arrangement. You look down at your makeshift bed and realize it's more sophisticated than any modern mattress. It molds to you, smells faintly of pine and smoke, and when you exhale, your breath fogs for only a second before disappearing, proof that the air is circulating exactly as intended. Outside, the snow gives a soft sigh as sunlight hits it. Inside, your bedding stays dry, warm, alive. You think about how every piece of this floor came from the land itself, nothing bought or wasted. When the camp moved, the ground layer stayed behind, returning to earth, already composting back into grass. No landfill, no leftovers, just renewal. There's something deeply human in that simplicity. You feel your pulse slow as you imagine dozens of tipis across the plain, each with its own layered floors glowing from within. Families stirring, children stretching, someone poking the fire to light fall, moving from sleep to day without ever having been cold. You sink back again, letting the earthy scent rise around you. The warmth from below blends with the faint heat still lingering in the air. You realize that the floor, the hides, the airflows, the unsung masterpiece of the tipi, the part no one photographs, the secret under the story. And as you lie there, tracing the faint texture of the hides, you think about how the people who built this didn't have words for thermodynamics or insulation efficiency. They just had instinct, patience, and the nightly motivation of don't freeze. Turns out, that's the best design school there is. The snow outside crunches again, maybe a dog circling before it lies down. You close your eyes, smiling at the thought that both of you man and dog trust the same. Ancient principle, the ground only feels cold if you let it. The center of the tipi still glows faintly with the ghost of last night's fire. You roll onto your side, stretch, and watch a thin ribbon of smoke wind upward, faint as a dream. The fire pit is small, not much bigger than a dinner plate, ringed with darkened stones that seem to hum with residual heat. Here, in the tipi's heart, warmth is a conversation between flame and breath, not a roaring inferno. The genius lies in how that tiny fire keeps everyone alive without choking them in smoke. You push yourself up and feel the lingering warmth on your palms. The air closest to the pit is comfortable, not searing. A few glowing embers wink like sleepy eyes. Someone, maybe you, kept them alive overnight, feeding just enough fuel to stop them from dying. That, you realize, is half the battle. The fire must always be tended, always alive. Too big, and it burns out quickly or fills the tipi with suffocating fumes. Too small, the night steals your heat before dawn. A mainstream fact. Most plains tribes built a shallow pit about 1 or 2 feet wide, directly in the center of the tipi, surrounded by stones collected from riverbeds. The stones served 3 purposes. They contained the fire, absorbed heat to radiate slowly, and provided a stable cooking base. After years of use, those same stones would glow faintly from absorbed resin and smoke. Some archaeologists even found centuries-old burn rings where camps once stood. A ghost map of warmth across the prairie. You lean closer and imagine the fire being lit from scratch. No matches, no lighters, just flint, steel, K, or a hand drill of cedar and yucca twirled until sparks kissed dried buffalo dung or shredded sage. Smoke, breath, patience, ignition. You can almost hear the crackle of triumph as the first ember flares to life. It's tiny and defiant against the cold. You feed the embers a stick and blow gently. The wood catches, a small blue flame unfurling, then orange and steady. You can smell resin and charred earth. It's oddly calming, the ritual of keeping fire alive, knowing it connects you to generations of hands who did the exact same thing in this same glow. Historians still argue whether the fire pits were dug into bare earth or lined with a layer of ash for insulation. Some accounts describe ashes being packed thick to hold heat longer, almost like primitive ceramic. Others claim too much ash made the pit unstable. You glance at this one and see both a thin ash bed over dirt. It's a compromise between the 2 schools of thought. You toss in another stick. The flames flare, licking upward before settling into that mesmerizing, rhythmic crackle. The light paints soft amber on the hides around you, flickering like candlelight through skin. The fire isn't just heat, it's a living companion. It breathes, moves, and even talks if you listen long enough. A fringe tidbit surfaces one passed through whispered legends. Some elders claim that fires built with specific wood spoke differently at night. Cedar popped cheerfully, pine hissed softly, cottonwood sighed like a voice in prayer. Families supposedly knew which sound meant the fire was content and which meant it wanted more fuel. Skeptical? Maybe. But as you sit here, listening to the hiss and pop, you find yourself believing. You notice how the smoke moves. It doesn't hang or sting your eyes. It slides upward in a graceful column, drawn by the tipi's design. The small draft from the doorway feeds oxygen to the flames, while the smoke flaps above create a low-pressure escape route. The fire stays strong, but not greedy. You realize this setup is an ancient balancing act: heat, oxygen, okay, and airflow, all tuned by instinct. Your mind drifts to the science of it. Warm air rises, cold air sinks, and in this perfect cone, those forces swirl into a self-sustaining current. The tipi breathes, pulling in fresh air from the base, expelling smoke from the top. No chimney needed, no carbon monoxide alarms required. It's aerodynamic survival disguised as simplicity. You poke the fire again, pushing a few coals aside. The stones around the pit are still hot from last night. You pick one up carefully, but the stick gets too hot to touch, radiating heat like a small sun. Those stones are part of another trick. They store warmth long after the flames die down. In the dead of night, families pulled them aside, wrapped them in scraps of hide, and tucked them under robes for portable warmth. You chuckle at the thought: prehistoric hot water bottles. It's perfectly sustainable. The only downside: if you forgot and rolled over one, you'd wake up swearing in at least 3 languages. There's another detail most outsiders miss. The fire pit isn't centered exactly. It's usually offset slightly toward the back of the tipi, closer to the smoke vent, but far enough to avoid singeing bedding. That subtle shift makes the airflow smoother, sending smoke straight out instead of swirling down onto sleepers. Every inch of placement matters. You add a small log, watching the flames leap higher. The warmth spreads outward in gentle waves. You can almost see it shimmering in the air, the invisible pulse of comfort, keeping the cold at bay. You close your eyes for a second and imagine the night again when the wind screamed across the plains. Inside, the fire's glow would cast shadows on the walls, each flicker like a heartbeat, reminding everyone they'd made it through another hour. Historians still argue whether fires burned all night or were allowed to die once bedding and body heat took over. Some say the women took turns tending embers, feeding them in shifts. Others think the coals were buried under ash to smolder until morning. Either way, the rhythm of heat management was communal. Fire wasn't a personal thing, it was everyone's responsibility. You notice a faint ring of soot above the pit, a permanent halo marking years of smoke. It's oddly beautiful a reminder of how many winters this space has seen, how many stories were told by this light. People cooked, mended clothes, whispered prayers, sang lullabies, all orbiting this small, stubborn flame. A small joke stirs in your tired mind. So, technically, this was the original open concept kitchen. You grin to yourself and toss in another stick, watching sparks float upward like lazy fireflies. Then you remember something you read once. Some tribes taught children to watch the fire closely, claiming that its flicker reflected their own moods. If it burned unevenly, they were restless. If it flared high, they were excited. Whether that was superstition or just a mindfulness trick, it makes sense. The fire mirrors you if you let it. You lean back on your hides, half-lidded, and watch the flames twist in slow motion. The warmth licks your face, the smoke curls upward, and everything feels balanced again. You think about how little it takes to stay alive. Just wood, air, patience, and a space to tend them outside. The wind stirs. The tipi creaks, and the fire answers with a hiss. For a moment, you realize the two are in dialogue, the same as they've always been, air inflamed, wind and will. You reach out to add one last stick, careful, reverent, almost like feeding a pet. The flames flare, settle, breathe, and as the warmth wraps around you again, you understand that this little pit isn't just the heart of the Tipians, the heart of everything. A small circle of light in a world of dark, always reminding you that survival doesn't roar. It hums quietly, glows softly, and never quite goes out. The smoke begins to thicken, drifting in lazy, swirling strands that catch the morning light sneaking through the tippy seams. You rub your eyes and cough just once before realizing that this right here is why survival in a tipi isn't only about warmth. It's also about breathing. Keeping smoke under control isn't easy when your living room, kitchen, and bedroom all share one space and one flame. The people who mastered this weren't just campers. They were atmospheric engineers long before the word existed. You glance up to the top of the tipi, where the poles converge in a smoky halo. The hole above isn't just an opening, it's an adjustable lung. Two triangular flaps, controlled by long poles that extend to the ground outside, act as a primitive yet remarkably effective ventilation system, depending on the wind direction. You or whoever's on flat duty can shift them to guide smoke out and keep rain from coming in. You reach for one of those poles now, nudge it slightly, and immediately the air changes. The smoke clears just enough for the world to reappear. It's crisp and breathable again. A mainstream historical fact. Almost every tipi used by plains tribes had smoke flaps, and their operation was an art form. The flaps weren't just left to chance. Their angles were constantly adjusted throughout the day and night. People read the wind the way sailors read the sea. They knew its moods, its speed, its scent even. If it shifted north, the flap on that side came down and the opposite side opened, pulling the draft through perfectly. You think about your modern house thermostat and feel a little humbled. These were thermostats, powered by intuition and experience, not plastic and batteries. You glance toward the door. The flap doors cracked open at the bottom, and you feel the faint current of air sneaking in. It's subtle but vital. The fire needs oxygen, and this gap feeds it in measured doses. The rising smoke, in turn, pulls that air upward, creating a convection cycle that feels almost mechanical in precision. The tipi is breathing. Every inhalation and exhalation, orchestrated by centuries of experimentation. But smoke management isn't purely practical. It's also spiritual. A fringe tidbit that surfaces in the back of your mind. Some elders believed smoke carried prayers upward. The rising columns of ash and breath were thought to ferry messages to the sky. So, yes, the smoke that might sting your eyes was also secrete a messenger between you and something vast. You find yourself staring at that slow, steady stream and wondering if maybe there's a little wisdom in that poetic logic. You shift closer to the center, where the fire still burns low. The air feels different near the pit warmer, cleaner, more dynamic. You can actually feel the draft pulling toward the smoke hole. It's the invisible hand keeping everyone alive. You imagine the nights when windstorms hit the tippy walls flexing, snow hissing outside, smoke threatening to choke the air. In those moments, someone would always rise quietly to adjust the flaps, half asleep but precise in their movements, like tuning a delicate instrument. Historians still argue whether smoke hole designs evolved independently across tribes or were shared innovations passed through trade and intermarriage. Some claim the Blackfoot had the most efficient system with double-eared covers. Others point to the Lakota, who perfected pole alignment for fast flap control. There's no clear consensus, just admiration. What's certain is that no one for Zors suffocated when these principles were honored. You notice how the hides above the fire have darkened with years of soot. Each one tinted charcoal black near the apex. That wasn't seen as a flaw, was a badge of endurance. In fact, some families deliberately smoked the upper hides early in the season, creating a natural weatherproof coating. The smoke sealed pores, repelled moisture, and bonus, gave everything a pleasant, woody smell that even your overpriced candle couldn't replicate. Another small trick. When wind gusts reversed and blew smoke downward, people tossed aromatic herbs like sweetgrass, sage, or juniper into the flames. The fresh scent helped mask the harshness of the smoke, and, according to oral accounts, insects hated it. There's your quirky tidbit, turns out. The tipi was also the world's first aromatherapy lounge and mosquito deterrent in one. You grin at that thought, half serious, half envious. Outside, the wind picks up suddenly. You hear the flaps above flutter, and a thin draft sneaks through the doorway. You react instinctively, gripping the pole beside you and angling the flaps toward the gust. Instantly, the air shifts, again the smoke draws upward. The flames grow steadier. It's like piloting an invisible ship through invisible waves. You exhale, slowly, realizing how much awareness this life demanded. You remember reading that children were often trained early to recognize smoke patterns. A tippy filling too fast meant someone misread the wind or let a flap sag. Correcting it wasn't punishment, it was pride, proof you understood your environment. You imagine a small child sitting exactly where you are, watching the fire, learning how it breathes. You can't help smiling. Maybe that's the best classroom ever built, one that smells of cedar and survival. There's a moment of perfect stillness now. The smoke rises in a single, graceful column, unbroken, pure. You trace it with your eyes until it disappears into the sky through the vent. The sunlight slants through that same hole, golden and soft, merging with the smoke in a shimmering dance. It feels symbolic, somehow like meeting breath, warmth, meeting air, all balanced by the smallest gestures of human hands. Then, as if to test your serenity, a spark pops from the fire and lands on your sleeve. You pat it out with a muttered laugh. That's gratitude for keeping you alive, huh? You whisper to the flame. It flickers innocently, as if pretending not to hear. You lean back against the hides, feeling the air around you cycle again, cool at your feet, warm near your face. The science of survival hums quietly, disguised as comfort. And even as the smoke continues its dance, you notice how your eyes don't water anymore. You've adapted. The space has taught you its rhythm. You can't help one more stray thought. How did it smell at night? Really? Imagine hundreds of tipis across a winter encampment, all exhaling together, wood smoke, sage, hide, and snow. Maybe that scent is what home used to mean here. Not a structure, not a location, but a blend of air, fire, and life itself. The flames settle again, their shadows stretching long and slow. The smoke hole breathes steady and sure. You lie back, satisfied, breathing in that same air your ancestors once breathed out. For a moment, you swear you can almost hear them in the whispering draft above you, those countless hands that adjusted flaps, read winds, and taught fire how to behave. You exhaled softly, watching your breath join the upward stream. The smoke takes it, lifts it, and carries it away into the white light of morning. You shift your weight on the hides and feel a patch of warmth still clinging to where your hip had been pressed. The fire is low again, lays, glowing, content, but your body feels cocooned in a different kind of heat now. You realize that the people who slept here didn't depend on fire alone. The tipi could trap warmth, sure, but the final barrier between comfort and frostbite came down to what you wore and how cleverly you wore it. You pull your robe closer and imagine how the night must have unfolded centuries ago. Families curling up, children bundled in furs, the cold wind slicing outside, but never quite touching skin. The trick wasn't just layering, it was understanding how breath, body, and fur work together to make heat. A mainstream fact to start. Most plains tribes wore layers of tanned bison, hide, or elk skin, often with the fur left on the inside during winter. Under that came lighter layers, soft deerskin shirts or leggings. When it came time to sleep, they didn't always undress. The garments themselves became part of the sleeping system. Modern campers might call it clothing-based insulation, but you can just call it refusing to freeze. Historians still argue whether people slept fully dressed or partially unclothed to let the body breathe. Some 19th century observers claimed native families stripped down before wrapping themselves in robes to prevent sweat from freezing later. Others insist that removing layers was unthinkable in sub-zero weather. The truth, as usual, probably depends on the tribe, the season, and just how mean the wind was that night. You glance down at the robe covering your legs, heavy hide, soft and flexible. It's not stitched like a blanket. It's one continuous pelt with the fur turned inward. That fur catches heat the way clouds catch sunlight. Even your breath bouncing off, it feels warmer. You run your hand along the edge and notice it's trimmed with sinew stitching. Simple but perfect. No loose seams to leak warmth. Someone once told you the trick was to think of clothing not as separate, garments, but as a breathing system. The innermost layers handled sweat, the middle trapped air, and the outer stopped wind. You realize that's exactly how your high-tech winter jacket works today, except theirs didn't require a zipper or a warranty. A fringe tidbit flickers into your mind. Some winter travelers smeared a thin layer of animal fat, usually bear or buffalo, on exposed skin before sleeping. The greasy coating supposedly sealed in heat and prevented frostbite. It sounds messy, sure, but you can't deny the logic. You chuckle to yourself, imagining a modern skincare ad, introducing ancient thermal bomb guaranteed to make you glisten and survive. As you adjust your robe, the sound it makes soft, whispering, leathery fills the tipi. The air smells faintly of smoke and hide oil. You breathe it in and understand something deeper. Everything about this environment is about moisture management. Sweat and cold are mortal enemies here. Too much of one feeds the other. So the best strategy was to keep the skin dry, the air moving, and the heat layered, not trapped. You'd think of how people must have laid down at night, side by side, sometimes overlapping edges of their robes for shared warmth. A child nestled between parents would be wrapped in combined hides, often with soft rabbit fur lining the innermost layer. Rabbits, tiny, shivering creatures, wittingly offered one of the warmest materials known to humankind. And while modern sleeping bags brag about our value in thermal retention, you realize these folks had a different metric: survival value. They tested their insulation by simply waking up alive. You glance around the dim, tippy interior and imagine it full 6, maybe 8 people lying in concentric arcs around the fire, bodies arranged like spokes, feet toward the warmth, heads toward the outer wall. The collective heat from all those sleeping forms would raise the interior temperature by several degrees. It's a physics equation written in heartbeats. You pull your robe up to your chin and laugh softly. Human-powered central heating, you mutter. The fire cracks as if it approves the joke. Historians note that winter clothing wasn't just practical, it was deeply cultural. Designs reflected clan identity and craftsmanship. Some robes were painted with stories or symbols, visible even in dim firelight. You picture that now? Painted hides glinting faintly, art merging with necessity. Every garment, every layer was both tool and tale. Another subtle trick, the hoodless sleep wrap. Instead of hats, people sometimes pulled the fur edge of a robe over their heads, creating a tunnel of breath that kept air moist but didn't trap smoke. Others tied soft bands of fur or woven cloth around their ears. It's the same principle as your beanie, only with more style and zero synthetic fibers. You remember reading about a group of Lakota scouts who, on particularly brutal nights, heated stones by the fire, wrapped them in hides, and placed them near their feet inside sleeping robes. It's a simple, ideal localized heat storage, but it works astonishingly well. You can practically feel your toes warming just thinking about it. And here's a small debate that still gets tossed around. Some anthropologists believe sleeping close to the fire risked burns or smoke poisoning, while others argue that the Tipis design prevented both. The airflow carried fumes away, and the hides themselves reflected heat. You can test it now by stretching your hand toward the flames, warm but never scalding. The balance holds. A whisper of wind outside flaps the door cover, and a cool draft snakes in. You pull the robe tighter, but you're not uncomfortable. The air that enters feeds the fire. The warmth that escapes keeps things from becoming stifling. It's a dance between inside and out. And you're just one more warm body in the rhythm. Another fringe tale drifts into your sleepy mind. In some winter camps, people used snow as insulation. They'd pile it around the base of the tipi, deliberately sealing gaps. Snow, ironically, was used to fight cold, a paradox you can respect. The hides might have been animal, but the walls were part of the landscape itself. You stretch again and yawn. The robe creaks softly. You notice your breath condensing faintly in the air, but it's not enough to chill you. Your body heat, the robe, and the air between layers are working together like a living organism. That's when it hits you. Warmth isn't an object. Here it's a relationship. You remember another small joke someone once said: if you're cold, hug a buffalo. And honestly, that's not far off. Every robe, every hide, every piece of clothing is a preserved echo of the animal's life, still doing what it did best, fending warmth. You pat the robe's fur gently, whispering, "Thanks, old friend," and it seems to sigh back. Historians still argue whether the arrival of wool blankets from European traders changed sleeping habits dramatically or just added options. Some suggest people preferred their traditional hides, finding them more breathable and suited to the plains' humidity. Others claim wool became an instant favorite for portability. Either way, it's another example of adaptation, not replacement. You lean back and close your eyes, imagining all those layered textures, the tickle of fur, the softness of doeskin, the faint smoke in your hair. The tipi hums faintly around you, alive with the quiet rhythm of air and warmth. For all its simplicity, it's as advanced as anything in a mountaineering catalog. And just before you drift, one last thought curls through your drowsy mind. In a world before thermostats, insulation, or electric blankets, warmth wasn't something you turned on. It was something you became part of. You stir awake, feeling the hides beneath you shift softly. The fire is down to its quiet heartbeat of embers, and around you, the tipi breathes slow and deep. You roll onto your side, realizing your arm has been pressed against someone else's all-night warm, steady, reassuring. That's when you start to understand the real secret of sleeping in a tipi. Not just the fire, or the hides, or the flaps, but the bodies. Where and how everyone sleeps isn't random. It's design, tradition, and affection rolled into one human pattern of warmth. You lift your head slightly and look around. Shapes rise and fall under heavy robes, family members, neighbors, maybe a visitor or two. The sleeping arrangement follows its own ancient logic. The oldest, the wisest, or the most vulnerable always take the spot closest to the fire. That inner ring gets the softest hides and the steadiest warmth. From there, sleepers spiral outward by age or role, each ring sharing their heat with the next. It's like being part of a living, breathing radiator. A mainstream fact. Ethnography is stunning. Plains tribes noted that this circular sleeping pattern wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. Everything in tipi life revolved around circles, camps, ceremonies, the seasons themselves. The circle represented equality and unity. No corners meant no hierarchy, just flow. Even sleep followed that same quiet geometry. You shift slightly, feeling the faint draft along the floor. The air there is cooler deliberately so. The tipi's slope shape pushes warm air upward. Sleeping close to the hide wall means catching the gentler edge of that warmth. It's a system that rewards closeness. The more bodies, the more stable the temperature. Historians still argue whether the word tipi, itself loosely meaning dwelling or place to live, implies this kind of social unity, or if that interpretation came later. Either way, you can feel the truth of it right now. You turn toward the center. The fire's faint glow flickers across faces, each one peaceful, relaxed, framed by fur edges and the occasional stray lock of hair. The light makes everyone look timeless. You can't tell old from young, family from guest, just warmth and breath shared. A fringe tidbit floats through your sleepy brain. In some tribes, people believed your head should always point west when you slept, toward the setting sun, the direction of rest, endings, and ancestors. Others insisted on facing east, toward renewal and light. The argument, of course, was never settled. Even the land couldn't make up its mind about the proper direction to dream in. You remember reading how certain camps enforced head direction as cultural etiquette. Sleeping the wrong way wasn't just awkward, was disrespectful. So, even as you curl under your robe, you wonder if your own direction tonight would pass inspection. Probably not. You grin quietly, promising not to tell anyone. The silence is thick, broken only by the occasional sigh or shuffle. Someone near the fire turns over, the robe sliding with a slow hiss of hide against hide. You think about how intimately everyone here understands each other's breathing. It's the kind of awareness you only get from communal living, no walls, no headphones, just one shared soundscape of existence. You stretch one leg out, and the edge of your foot brushes another. The warmth of that tiny contact spreads up your leg faster than you'd expect. You think of modern survival advice, share body heat, and realize it wasn't an emergency trick back then. It was a nightly rhythm. Families slept close enough that even a half-conscious turn could mean a shared blanket, an instinctive arm thrown across someone's chest, an unspoken reassurance. You're not alone in the cold. Historians note that men and women typically slept on separate sides of the fire, though patterns varied by tribe. Some Tipis even had subtle partitions of cloth or skin for privacy, but during deep winter, those divisions blurred cold, made diplomats of everyone. A laugh bubbles up quietly in your chest at the thought. The great unifier wasn't politics. It was wind chill. A quirky little custom makes you smile as you recall it. Young children sometimes slept with their heads under their robes entirely, breathing their own warm air until morning. Parents warned them not to, fearing suffocation, but the habit persisted because will it worked. You can imagine a child's muffled giggle under there, a fur cocoon of safety in the middle of a howling winter night. You look around again. The layout of bodies is almost poetic. A human sunburst around a core of coals. You can see how the firelight catches different materials: dull leather, shining hair, the faint gleam of a metal button from trade goods. Everything seems perfectly placed, nothing wasted. The symmetry gives you a sense of calm. You recall another scholarly debate about posture, whether people lay flat, curled, or even sat upright to sleep. Some 19th century sketches show native men sitting cross-legged, heads bowed onto chests, sleeping that way for short winter naps. Others depict full reclined positions, with hides piled high. The truth probably depended on the night's temperature and how recently anyone had eaten. A big meal meant deeper rest. You breathe in through your nose, and the air feels warm, humid from shared exhalations. The Tipis microclimate is tangible, now bubble of 60 degrees maybe, while outside it's 30 below. You whisper to yourself, sleeping in a cloud of other people's heat. And somehow, it sounds comforting, not gross. Then comes the funny part. You roll slightly, your elbow thunks into something hard. You freeze, thinking it's a rock until the rock grunts. Turns out, you've just jabbed the shoulder of the warrior sleeping next to you. His response is a sleepy mutter and a lazy shove that nearly rolls you back toward the fire. You stifle a laugh, because that's exactly the kind of nighttime choreography everyone learns fast. Keep limbs to yourself or risk mid-sleep retaliation. You settle again. It's facing the wall now. The hides rippled faintly from the draft, casting moving shadows that look like distant mountains. Beyond them, the wind moans softly steady, eternal. But here inside, the collective warmth hums stronger than any storm. Another fringe belief whispers through memory. Some tribes thought dreams could mingle in shared sleeping spaces. If two people slept too close, their dreams might intertwine. Lovers took advantage of that. Enemies avoided it. Whether you buy into that or not, it adds a strange romance to the idea of communal sleep, your unconscious selves brushing shoulders in the dark. You lie still, imagining all those centuries of nights like this, people dreaming in sync, fires pulsing low, wind combing the hides from outside. The thought stretches across time like a shared breath, and then it hits you how alien this would seem to modern life. You, who probably need white noise machines and blackout curtains, lying here in a structure of wood and skin, perfectly content in nothing but shared heat and rhythm. The sleep itself feels different, less isolated. It's more human. The embers crack softly, and the tiniest flicker of light dances across your face. You shift your robe up again and exhale slowly. The person beside you murmurs something in their sleep. Maybe a dream, maybe a memory. It fades into the soft whoosh of the wind as your eyes close again. You can feel the circle holding bodies radiating warmth, air moving, fire pulsing, every element tuned by instinct, by care. You smile faintly, realizing that out here, sleeping is an act of cooperation as much as rest. The tipi creaks, the wind sighs, and within that gentle soundscape, your body finally melts into the warmth of all the others, one heartbeat among many, perfectly placed in the circle. You blink awake to the sound of a soft cough near the center of the tibia, raspy. Elder's cough, not alarming, just the sort that says, morning has arrived and the fire needs feeding. You pull yourself upright, robe sliding off your shoulders, and see the figure stirring near the embers. An older woman, wrapped in a fur robe so heavy it seems to swallow her whole, pokes the ashes with a stick. Sparks flare, golden and sleepy. Around her, a few smaller forms wriggle under hides, one tiny hand reaching toward the light. Babies, elders, and everyone in between. The tipi has its own quiet hierarchy of care, and it's all about keeping the fragile ones warm. The older woman hums softly, a tune that sounds older than the wind outside. She reaches for a bundle of twigs and feeds the fire with practiced patience. The smoke rises thin and steady. She's done this thousands of times. You realize that in every tipi, there was always someone like her, the keeper of warmth, the watcher of embers. A mainstream fact: infants in many plains tribes were kept in cradle boards padded with soft moss or shredded bark, lined with fur in winter. The moss wasn't just cushioning, it was a natural diaper system, absorbent and insulating. Mothers often slept with the cradle boards beside them or even partially under their robes, using their own body heat to keep the baby's tiny fingers warm. You glance toward one of the smaller bundles now, a cradle-shaped mound of hide with a faint squeak from inside, and you can almost feel that warmth radiating outward like a heartbeat. You shift your gaze to the elder again. Her face glows orange in the firelight, lines deep as canyon ridges. She moves slowly, every gesture deliberate, conserving energy. It makes sense. Elders weren't just respected. They were temperature priorities. In the brutal plains winter, age came with seating privileges. The spot nearest the fire was often reserved for grandparents or the sick, not out of sentimentality, but pure survival strategy. Historians still argue whether this seating pattern was rigid custom or flexible courtesy. Some records suggest exact positioning rules by kinship rank, while others imply it was more fluid, dictated by need. Either way, you can see how naturally it unfolds. Now no words, it's just unspoken understanding. The elder glances toward the doorway flap, where a younger woman stirs. She's likely the baby's mother, hair tousled, robe still clinging with frost from where she'd leaned against the hide wall. She sits up and draws the cradle board close, checking the infant's face, breathing warmth onto its cheeks. Then she tucks her own robe over both of them. You can't help but smile. It's the simplest, oldest act in human history, one body shielding another from the cold. A fringe tidbit from scattered accounts claims that in extreme cold, babies were sometimes double wrapped inside 2 layers of fur, with tiny heated stones placed near but never touching their bodies. The stones were wrapped in cloth to radiate steady warmth through the night. You think about that for a moment, how carefully you'd have to monitor the heat. It's the trust it required, the precision born of experience. One wrong move and comfort could turn to danger. Yet somehow, generation after generation, they got it right. You stretch your legs and glance toward the tipi's edge. The outermost sleepers are stirring 2 young men and older children. They're closer to the draft, the cold seats, but that's not neglect. It's training. Growing bodies were thought to adapt better to cooler air, toughening them for hunts, long rides, and open plains. You can almost hear a father's voice teasing from memory. If you can sleep there, you can face anything. You rub your arms, feeling a momentary chill, and then remember, something remarkable cold wasn't always the enemy. Some believed it strengthened the spirit. Among certain tribes, brief exposure to freezing air was used to test endurance, even in childhood. A boy might be sent briefly outside at dawn to greet the frost, then welcomed back into warmth. You picture that now, the quick gasp, the rush back into the tipi, explosion of laughter as fur robes wrap around him again. Survival and joy weren't opposites here. They danced together. The baby near the fire makes a soft noise, a cross between a sigh and a hiccup. The mother adjusts, feeding it quietly, her movements fluid and unbothered. You realize how astonishingly peaceful the scene feels. No panic, no rush, just routine. Even in what would freeze most of us solid, this life hums with competence. The elder notices you watching and grins toothlessly. Cold never asks permission. Her expression seems to say, you smile back, though you're not sure she'd find your modern notion of space heaters impressive. Historians still argue whether Tipi interiors reached surprisingly high temperatures. Some say up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit near the fire center. Others doubt such figures, citing constant drafts. The debate misses the point. Warmth here isn't measured by degrees, it's measured by comfort. The baby sleeps. The elder hums. The rest breathe easily. That's the only thermometer that mattered. You remember a story about elders who could, predict weather changes by how their joints felt during sleep. If they woke with aching knees, snow was coming. If they slept soundly, the skies would clear. Call it superstition, or call it barometric sensitivity. Either way, it worked. You chuckle quietly, thinking that modern meteorologists with all their satellites still get it wrong sometimes. Maybe we should have just kept better track of Grandma's knees. The Tipis air shifts as dawn brightens. Someone opens the flap wider, letting in a sliver of sunlight and a knife of cold. Instantly, the elder coughs again, and the flap drops shut. Balance restored. The whole system is so finely tuned that even a few seconds of draft can change the comfort equation. You glance once more at the baby. Its cradle board is beautifully decorated tiny beads, catching the firelight like stars. Even in a world of raw survival, beauty had a place. Warmth wasn't only physical, it was emotional, cultural, symbolic. Every stitch said, you belong here. You're safe. Fringe belief whispers in the back of your mind. Some said babies dreamed of animals they'd one day meet, and the warmth of the cradle helped guide those dreams. Heat wasn't just protection, it was invitation. You imagine that tiny dreamscape now, the hum of fire, the heartbeat of the mother, and maybe, somewhere in that glow, the shape of a bison forming. The elder stirs again, satisfied with the fire's strength, and leans back. The orange light dances across her face. You think about how many winters she survived, how many times she's built this same small sun from twigs and smoke. She knows the cold personally, but she's never afraid of it. You pull your robe close, mirroring her posture, and realize that's the secret you've been circling all along. They didn't defeat winter, they made peace with it. Babies, elders, everyone found their place in the circle, and warmth flowed through them all like breath. Outside, a gust howls across the snow, but inside, the Tipi answers softly with laughter, humming, the pop of the fire, and the steady rhythm of survival made graceful. The day fades again, the endless white horizon sinking under a bruised purple sky. You can feel the cold long before you step outside, waits like a living thing beyond the flap, patient and cunning. You duck through anyway, pulling your robe tight, and the air instantly bites your face. It's the kind of cold that burns before it numbs, sharp enough to steal your breath mid-exhale. Out here, even the snow sounds different, underfoot dry, squeaky, defiant. You look back at the line of Tipis, their outlines glowing faintly against the dusk. Each one leans into the wind like a tired traveler. You'd think the canvasor hides really would flap like sails, but they barely move. The conical design you've come to admire channels gusts upward and around, splitting the pressure instead of fighting it. You realize that this is where architecture meets instinct. The Tipi isn't a house, it's an aerodynamic companion, a mainstream historical fact. Ethnographies documented that many plains tribes could take down and re-erect a full Tipi in under an hour. Even in winter, mobility was survival. When the wind changed, when the herds moved, when storms brewed, the people moved too. the poles, each one 15 to 20 feet long, became their portable skeletons of safety. Now, as a blizzard begins to whisper on the horizon, you feel the tempo shift. People move quickly, wordlessly, years of routine compressed into minutes. A child grabs a tether strap. An elder pulls furs inside. Someone tightens the smoke flaps from within. It's like watching a lung seal itself against the storm. Historians still argue whether people truly slept through such storms or merely endured them and toured. Cycles of half-rest waking every hour to feed the fire or adjust the hides. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between. Sleep wasn't a continuous dream, but a negotiation with the weather. You help pull one side of the flap tighter. The rope feels like ice against your fingers, and you find yourself muttering a joke just to keep your teeth from chattering. Nature's way of reminding you that gloves are not optional. The man beside you laughs softly and hands you a strip of tanned hide-instant mitten upgrade. Back inside. The tipi is dim and smoky, but it feels like stepping into a miracle. The temperature jumps instantly. Your eyelashes stall. The fire has been stoked to a fierce little volcano, and everyone's cheeks glow with reflected heat. Snow hisses against the outer walls, melting and refreezing in uneven rhythms. The sound becomes a kind of lullaby erratic, but strangely comforting. Someone passes you a cup made from a bison horn, filled with something hot and faintly bitter herbal tea. Maybe you sip it, cough, and the elder smirks knowingly. "It's strong," she murmurs. You nod, strong enough to melt your eyebrows. She laughs, a wheezy, approving sound. That's joke number 2 of the night, proof that humor survives where warmth might fail. A fringe tidbit surfaces in your mind. Some stories claim that during fierce snowstorms, people deliberately bank snow around a tipi's base. It sounds counterintuitive, but it worked. The packed snow insulated better than air, sealing drafts and trapping warmth. You picture that? The tipi, half buried, like a hibernating creature, and it suddenly seems genius. Someone near the door adjusts a flap rope. Every movement inside now is measured for efficiency. Even children play their part, feeding twigs into the flames or checking that sleeping robes aren't touching the hide. A crucial step if a robe froze to the wall. It could wick moisture and chill the sleeper by dawn. Every detail matters. The fire's light flickers over the interior paintings, spirals, handprints. They seem to move in the dancing light, as if the tipi itself dreams along with its people. You feel that peculiar blend of exhaustion and calm that only storms can bring. Danger outside, competence inside. Another historical fact surfaces. You can almost hear your inner documentary narrator. Explorers like George Catlin noted that in the worst winter storms, some Tipis doubled up on layers of hides, outer covers of rawhide or canvas later, when trade goods came acted as armor. The gap between layers trapped air, just like modern insulation. You smile faintly as that turns out. Double pane windows are ancient technology in disguise. As the wind howls, you notice something remarkable. The sound changes depending on which direction it hits. When it strikes the tipi's back, the air rushes smoothly upward. When it catches the front flaps, the hides tremble like a drum. The entire structure becomes a musical instrument for the storm, a reminder that the line between fear and beauty is razor. You glance toward the sleeping circle again. The elder dozes by the fire, chin tucked into her robe. The baby from earlier snores softly, a tiny puff of steam marking each exhale. Their warmth seems impossible against what's raging outside. You reach out, feeling the fire's edge on your palm, and realize that inside this small cone of humanity, cultures, laws bend a little. Historians still argue whether the plains tribes possessed specialized storm songs, melodies meant to calm the wind. Some swear by it, pointing to oral traditions describing music as communication with weather spirits. Others say Those accounts were poetic exaggerations by early missionaries. Still, when you hear the elder hum softly under her breath, you decide not to question it. Maybe the wind listens after all. Hours pass. The storm thickens. Snow seeps under the flap edges, forming ghostly fingers that melt on contact with the warm ground. The air grows heavy with humidity, and smoke briefly thickens before clearing again. A boy stands, adjusts the poles slightly to widen the draft path, and just like that, the air smooths out. It's a masterclass in instinctive engineering. You settle back onto your robe, grateful for the dense layers of bison hide beneath you. The tipi sways slightly, creaking like an old ship, but never truly yields. You think about modern tents, their fiberglass poles and fancy vents. Can't realize this design older than recorded history still beats most of them. Joke number 3 slips out as you murmur to yourself, maybe Ray should start selling tipi too. 0 includes snowproof wisdom and lifetime fire glow. Sleepy chuckle from across the fire lets you know someone heard. French winter trick comes to mind. Travelers sometimes used heated stones or even dried bison dung. It burns hot and slow, like charcoal, to pre-warm their robes before sleeping. You can imagine how that must have felt like slipping into a preheated bed centuries before electric blankets existed. You adjust your robe and lie back. The snow's rhythm on the hide sounds like gentle applause, now nature conceding defeat. The tipi doesn't just survive the storm, it tames it. You can almost feel the cold sulking outside, plotting its next attempt. Eventually, the wind softens, shifting to a low moan. The silence that follows feels deeper than sleep. Someone murmurs a prayer of thanks, and the elder responds with a wordless hum. The air warms, the fire settles, and you close your eyes again. Somewhere between waking and dreaming, you think, maybe this is the real power of the tipi. It doesn't keep the cold out. It teaches you how to live with it, breathe with it, outlast it. Every pole, every scene, every ember is part of an agreement between humans and winter. You do your worst, and we'll still dream through it outside. The storm drifts away like a tired animal, leaving only stars in its wake. Side, the circle holds. You pull your robe tighter, smile faintly, and let sleep return confident now that the tipi's heartbeat will never quite go out. When the storm finally passes, you step out into a silence so wide it feels like sound itself has frozen. The snow gleams under a bruised pink dawn, the horizon stitched with the faint tracks of bison. Your breath fogs instantly. Behind you, the tipis glimmer with frost, their outlines sharp as crystal geometry against the pale sky. You realize that for these people, warmth wasn't just about fire, it was about timing. You survive the winter, not by defying it, but by moving with its rhythm. A mainstream historical fact. Many plains tribes were not fully nomadic, but seasonally mobile. They followed the great cycles of migration bison herds, ripening berries, thawing rivers. Each movement was calculated to balance shelter, food, and warmth. The winter camp wasn't an accident. It was a carefully chosen location, often tucked in river valleys, sheltered by cottonwoods or bluffs that broke the wind. The tipis you see here didn't just happen to stand. They were placed like chess pieces in nature's own strategy game. You trudge toward the edge of camp, boots crunching. From this slight rise, you can see the smoke trails from 20-odd tipis curling lazily into the cold. Down below, people are already at work. Women shaking out robes too dry, men splitting frozen wood with rhythmic thuds, children sliding across packed snow like human sleds. The camp pulses with life again. Historians still argue whether winter camps were smaller, more intimate family groups, or large communal gatherings that lasted months. Some journals describe isolated clusters of a few tipis. Others recall hundreds, entire nations encamped under one skyline of smoke. The truth probably shifted year to year, depending on weather. Food stores. Kent, the invisible politics of neighboring tribes. You pause near a line of poles where strips of dried meat hang stiff as bark. Food is part of the warmth equation too, you realize. Fat equals heat. Energy equals endurance. That's why so much effort goes into preserving buffalo, elk, or deer long before the snow comes. The technique: cutting the meat thin, drying it over low smoke, pounding it with fat and berries into pemmican creates not just food, but portable fire for the body. You pick up a small piece of pemmican offered by a passing boy. It tastes like candle wax and sweet berries, but you can feel the energy spreading instantly. It's not a meal. He grins. It's fuel. You laugh, because that's joke number one, simple. Practical truth disguised as humor. A fringe tidbit tickles your memory, some elders claimed. You could tell the moral quality of a camp by how its stores were shared in winter. A generous camp, they said, stayed warmer. Stinginess chilled the heart first. It sounds poetic, but you suspect there's science in it. Shared food means stronger bodies, fewer quarrels, steadier fires. Generosity literally heats the place up. You pass a row of bundled hides stacked on wooden racks. Some are scraped clean, others still stiff with frost. Their preparation is ongoing, even in midwinter. Every hide might become a new robe, a new tipi cover, or an emergency layer if the temperature plunged again. The people here never stop preparing, not in panic, but as habit. You glance toward the distant ridge, where faint trails snake away. That's the route southward, where early spring will come first. When the snow softens and grass peeks through, the whole camp will shift. Tipis will come down, poles lashed to travois, pulled by horses or dogs. The ground will erase their traces in a day, leaving nothing but circular scars of trampled snow. The camp will bloom again elsewhere, like migrating constellations. Historians still argue about how exactly these movements were coordinated. Some believe winter mobility followed matrilineal decisions. The women owning the Tipis decided when to move. Others argue for male council consensus, guided by scouts. You smile, imagining the discussion, everyone pretending to be practical, while secretly just tired of frostbitten toes. You squat beside a small group of young hunters, repairing their snowshoes. They use sinew laces that creak faintly as they tighten their fingers quick despite the cold. One of them looks up and gestures toward the tree line. "We'll check the traps soon," he says. "Rabbit, fox, maybe ermine. Every bit of fur matters." Winter clothing is an ever-shifting project. The tipi may block wind, but clothing is your personal shelter. Your movable micro-tipi. The elder from earlier shuffles past, nodding approvingly. She carries a bundle of sage, which she throws into the fire pit at the camp's edge. The smoke coils upward, sharp and sweet. "Keep the air clean," she mutters. You can't tell whether she means spiritually or literally, and maybe it doesn't matter. The act itself warms her hands and heart. Another fact: archaeological digs in old wintering grounds often revealed clusters of bones and hearthstones arranged in circles of evidence that even when Tipis vanished with the thaw, their footprint lingered. Sometimes caches of dried meat were buried nearby in pits lined with grass. The logic was simple: always have something waiting for your return. Fringe beliefs suggests those caches weren't just practical. They were spiritual offerings to the land. Leave a little warmth behind, and the land remembers your kindness. The anthropologists can debate that all they want, but you can't deny the elegance of it. Generosity as a survival tactic. You watch a pair of children chase each other, their laughter rolling like small bells across the snow. Their breath steams in the air. You wonder how they manage to play barefoot sometimes, because, yes, occasionally they do. The ground is cold, but the body adapts. The game ends when one of them faceplants into a drift, bursts up laughing, and races back to the fire. You chuckle too, shaking your head. Joke number 2. Kids these days, built-in central heating. As evening folds back in, you see people begin to prepare again for nightfall. Fresh wood, fresh bedding, the same eternal rhythm. You realize something subtle. Warmth here isn't a moment you achieve, it's a rhythm you maintain. Like breathing or storytelling, it's a continuous act. Historians still argue whether certain tribes prefer to overwinter in wooded valleys or open plains. Some sources claim the forest offered better wind cover. Others say open ground prevented snowdrifts that could bury camps. The evidence goes both ways, but one truth emerges. Choice equals life. You can't just huddle and hope. You move, you think, you adapt. As the sun slips behind the hills, the camp becomes a constellation of embers again. Tipis glow like lanterns, soft orange light pulsing through translucent hides. From up here, it looks like the earth itself has freckles of fire. Someone offers you another bowl of sturge, stick made from dried meat and snowmelt. You take a bite and feel the warmth spread through your chest, slow and steady. It's not just temperature, it's belonging. A final French trick reaches your ears from the elder sitting nearby. She leans in and whispers, "If the night's too cold for dreams, bury a hot stone under your bedding. The ground remembers the fire." You grin. Joke number 3, practically writing itself. Guess that makes it geothermal heating, right? She cackles so loud the baby nearby startles. "Exactly," she says, eyes bright with mischief, as you settle back and the wind begins its nightly gossip with the hides again. You understand why the camp thrives. Warmth isn't something they chase, it's something they create together, piece by piece, action by action. Fire, food, movement, kindness, they're all the same language. You pull your robe tighter and watch your breath swirl away. Tomorrow, the camp may move again, or it may stay another week. Either way, they'll be ready. They always are. The night settles again, softer this time, and you feel it before you see it, the shift from survival to serenity. The cold still gnaws at the edges of the world, but inside the tipi, the rhythm has changed. The chores are done, the fires are steady, and the smell of smoke and tallow lingers like a lullaby. This is when stories begin, the sacred hour, when voices replace wind, and warmth comes not just from fire, but from words. You ease closer to the center, where a small group gathers. The elder sits cross-legged, a woven robe pulled around her like a shadow. The firelight turns her wrinkles into golden canyons. She doesn't announce the story. She simply begins speaking, as if picking up a conversation started by the stars. Her voice is slow, warm, textured, like snow melting on a drum. The story winds around you. Something about a coyote who stole the sun, a familiar tale in many versions across the plains. But tonight, it's more than my deed's instruction. The coyote, clever but careless, learns that warmth is a gift earned by humility, not hoarded by greed. You smile at the moral. It's the same one you saw in action today when people shared food and fuel. The story is just another kind of insulation against ignorance, against forgetting. A mainstream historical fact. Oral storytelling wasn't merely entertainment. For many native peoples, it was an education system, moral compass, and memory vault all at once. Winter, especially, was story season. You told the big myths only when the snakes and bears were sleeping, out of respect. So, when the world froze, the imagination thawed. You close your eyes briefly, letting the elder's voice wash over you. Around the tipi, faces glow in the firelight, eyes half shut, bodies leaning against one another in quiet communion. Even the baby is silent now, soothed by cadence alone. You can feel the collective exhale, a moment of rest deeper than sleep. And then, from across the tipi, a young man clears his throat. "Tell the dream story," he says softly. A few nods, a few murmurs of agreement. The elder's smile widens, sly and knowing, the one where the world almost froze. She asks. Someone chuckles. That's the one. French tidbit flickers through your mind. Some tribes believed dreams and storytelling were connected, acts one done with the mouth, the other with the spirit. Both kept the world alive by retelling it. The elder's grin suggests she believes it too. She leans forward, hands extended toward the fire, and begins again. The story tells of a time when winter refused to end, when the sun hid its face and the people grew weak. They built fires until the wood was gone, wore robes until they tore, and still the frost crept closer. So, one woman, always a woman in these stories, strong and stubborn, walked into the mountains to speak with the wind itself. The elder pauses, her eyes flicking toward you, as if to check whether you're still with her. You nod slightly. She continues. She told the wind, "You've made your point. Now let us rest." And the wind, who respected honesty, relented, but only after she promised that each winter people would remember to thank the cold for reminding them to stay close. The circle hums quietly, the story settling like a blanket over everyone. Historians still argue whether such myths were metaphorical explanations for seasonal hardship or encoded survival knowledge. Maybe both. You find yourself thinking that whether or not the wind literally listens, it clearly shaped the way people lived with reverence, not resentment. Someone behind you plucks softly at a hand drum, a lazy heartbeat rhythm that folds itself into the crackle of the fire. The elder starts to hum again, low and steady. The hum becomes a melody, then words lullaby. The lyrics drift through the smoke, about snow falling gently, about the earth sleeping beneath it, about warmth that never really dies. A small girl curls against her mother, mouthing the words as if she's known them forever. You realize she probably has. The song's repetition is hypnotic. It isn't meant to be performed, but absorbed. In this space, sound itself feels like heat. A fringe belief whispers through your memory. Some plains cultures held that words carry temperature, that blessings spoken with calm hearts can warm the spirit, while anger can chill it. Scientists might scoff, but sitting here, surrounded by gentle murmurs and rising heat, you could swear there's physics in that. The elder finishes the song and sighs. "Now," she says, "you tell one." The young man laughs nervously. "Me, my stories are all short." She grins. "Good." The fire's small. Laughter ripples around the tippier, second-like joke of the section, unforced, warm as the flames. He clears his throat again and begins a quick tale half-truth, half-exaggeration about chasing a buffalo through snow so deep it swallowed horses. He gestures wildly, voice animated, until the baby squeals in delight. The laughter that follows shakes the hides above your head. You watch the way these stories travel, each one sparking a new voice, a new laugh, a new shared glance. It's not chaos, it's connection. Even the jokes, the self-deprecating ones about frozen toes or stubborn firewood, serve a function. Humor, here, survival's twin brother. A mainstream observation from early anthropologists noted that laughter was frequent, even in harsh conditions, not as denial, but as discipline. It diffused fear. The moment you can laugh at the cold, it loses power. You suspect that's as true in a tipi as it is in your own life. The elder leans back, satisfied. "The stories keep the cold outside," she says quietly. You look toward the flap. Snow drifts softly beyond it, like silent applause. Historians still argue whether rituals like this nighttime storytelling, communal singing, served religious or purely social purposes. To you, it's clearly both. The sacred and the ordinary sleep in the same bed here, like fire and shadow. A boy near the fire yawns and curls into his robe. The drum slows, becoming a soft, steady heartbeat again. Someone murmurs another prayer, this one barely audible. It's not formal, just gratitude, whispered into smoke. The elder reaches toward the coals and draws a circle in the ashes with a stick. "That's the world," she says, "and we are the spark that warms it." Her words hang there, shimmering, before dissolving into the quiet. You realize that everything tonight, every song, every myth, every joke is insulation for the soul. The tipi holds not just bodies, but stories, laughter, memory, and faith. Its warmth you can't measure in degrees as the fire dims and people drift into sleep. The elder's final words echo in your head. Thank the cold. It reminds you to be human. Outside, the wind rises again, but this time it sounds different, less hostile, more like a companion exhaling beside the camp. You lie back, pull your robe close, and let the rhythm of the drum fade to nothing. The tipi breathes once more, alive with dreams and stories that never quite end, even when the snow tries to silence them. Morning creeps in with a whisper instead of a glare. You wake to the faint hiss of the fire being coaxed back to life. The flap of the tipi gently opening to release last night's dreams into the cold. The air bites, but it's no longer cruelly. You've learned its language. You stretch under the robe, and for the first time since this journey began, you don't shiver. The tipi hums with quiet motion. Someone grinding dried berries. Someone else humming yesterday's lullaby under their breath. You step outside, blinking into the new light. The world glows silver and gold, the sun barely breaking over the ridge. The snow sparkles as if someone spilled powdered sugar across the plains. The camp feels different, lighter, almost ready to move. You realize this is what survival really means here, not just outlasting the cold, but knowing when to let it go. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. Most plains tribes moved their camps several times a year, often breaking winter camp as soon as spring thaw began. The timing was crucial. Leave too soon, and you risk starvation in slushy, unstable weather. Stay too long, and you miss the migration of game. Mobility wasn't random, it was ritual precision. The people around you move like clockwork, but without rush. Tipi poles are unlashed, hides folded, belongings bundled into neat rolls. It's like watching the earth exhale. What took hours to raise can come down in minutes. The same poles that held up the walls now form the frames of travoy triangular sleds pulled by horses or dogs. The camp begins to dissolve, not vanish. Every piece knows exactly where it belongs next. You lend a hand, helping to roll the thick hide that served as your wall for so many nights. It smells of smoke and faint pine resin. You feel oddly sentimental about it, like parting with a loyal friend. You glance at the elder, who notices your hesitation and smiles. Don't worry, she says. You'll see it again. You chuckle light. Joke number 1. Yeah, just like I'll see summer again. She winks. If you keep helping, you follow her toward the edge of camp where horses stamp their hooves impatiently. Steam curls from their nostrils as the first travoy is hitched up. The rhythmic clinking of harnesses fills the air. Children chase each other between the animals, laughter rising like sparks. Despite the bustle, everything remains calm, choreographed. A French tidbit floats to mind. Explorers once noted that even the most chaotic seeming camp movements followed invisible rules of order. Each family knew their place in the procession, down to who carried the fire. That's right, the fire moved too. Before the last tipi was down, someone scooped embers into a clay pot of buffalo horn. That glowing coal, carried from camp to camp, kept the spirit of home alive. No matches, no friction sticks, just living flame. Passed hand to hand like a heartbeat. You watch as a woman carefully lifts one such ember, nestled in ash, and tucks it into a bundle. Can't let it die, she says simply. You nod, realizing it's more than practicality, it's continuity. The same fire that warmed you last night will light the next camp's hearth. Historians still argue whether this practice was symbolic, spiritual, or purely functional. You suspect it was all three. You can't draw neat lines here. Warmth, faith, and efficiency were all part of the same ecosystem as the first horses move out. The crunch of snow gives way to soft thuds on thawing ground. The procession snakes along the valley, glinting with reflected sunlight. You walk near the rear, where children carry smaller loads and someone strums a hand drum to keep rhythm. The beat keeps your steps even, your mind oddly clear. Soon, the camp becomes a trail of movement, a living river across the plains. You pass over frozen creeks, skirt patches of bare earth where the sun has already done its work. Every so often, someone stops to adjust a bundle or pick up a fallen stick, and you can feel the collective patience of the group. No complaints, no hurry. This isn't escape. It's migration, part of the natural order, a mainstream historical fact. When spring truly arrived, the next destination was often a known hunting ground or gathering site places used by generations, rich in resources and memories. Some even revisited old campsites, finding the buried food caches still intact, thawed but edible. You imagine unearthing last year's pemmican like buried treasure. The ultimate proof of planning paying off. Around midday, the air warms enough for you to shed a layer. You notice the camp's movement has a rhythm. Stop, rest, check the animals, move again. It's less like a caravan and more like a migrating heartbeat. You start humming that lullaby from last night, unconsciously syncing your steps with its rhythm. The elder rides beside you for a while, pointing out subtle signs in the land, how the snow drifts differently near willow groves, how the wind shifts before a thaw. The land talks, she says. You just have to stop talking long enough to listen. You grin. That explains why I never hear it. She laughs, joke number 2, and taps her shoulder with a small willow branch. Start listening. Then, hours pass, and finally, the new campsite comes into view, a gentle slope near a river bend, shielded by tall pines. The snow here is thinner, and water glints through patches of ice. People immediately begin to set up the new circle. Poles rise like ribs again, hides stretched, smoke holes aligned to the wind's new direction. The ember is unwrapped, coaxed to life, and soon the first wisps of smoke twist upward into blue sky. You feel the satisfaction settle in your chest, like watching a pulse return. The cycle continues. A fringe tidbit says that when a new fire caught, it was polite to toss a pinch of food into it as an offering to the unseen. A piece of dried meat, a shred of root, even a sprinkle of salt. You see someone do just that, whispering something too soft to hear. Maybe it's thanks to the fire, or maybe it's to the land itself for letting them stay. Either way, it feels right. Historians still argue about how precise tipi placements were. Some claim the openings always faced east toward the rising sun. Others believe they were adjusted daily for wind direction. Watching the process now, you realize it's a balance of both. Reverence meets practicality. You align with the sun and stay alive. As evening approaches, the new camp hums with life. Water boils, dogs bark, laughter spills through the air again. You sit on a log near the river, watching reflections dance in the slow-moving current. The elder joins you, passing a bowl of stew. You thank her, and she nods. See, she says, the cold teaches you to move. The thaw teaches you to stay. You take a sip and grin. So when do we just relax? She snorts softly. Joke number 3. When the sun gets tired, the horizon bleeds orange and purple as the day winds down. You lean back, the familiar warmth of firelight brushing your face again. It's astonishing how quickly this place feels like home already, though it was empty just hours ago. The fire crackles with new wood, the air smells of broth and pine, and your muscles, though tired, hum with a strange peace. Historians still argue whether these cyclical movements made the plains, tribes, nomads, or pattern settlers. The terminology hardly matters. Watching this rebirth, you think the more accurate term might be dancers always moving in rhythm with something larger than themselves. As stars begin to flicker overhead, you wrap yourself tighter in your robe. The sound of drumming starts faintly again, echoing through the trees. The fire pops, releasing tiny embers that drift upward like miniature comets. You follow their paths until they vanish into the dark. Each one a reminder. Warmth doesn't die, it transforms, travels, waits for the next story. The camp settles once more into its familiar heartbeat. And as your eyes grow heavy, you think the secret wasn't just how they survived the cold, but how they moved through it with humor, grace, and unshakable rhythm. By now, you can almost predict the morning the way the light stretches over the plains. Okay, the faint pop of coals, the shuffling of moccasins over packed snow. But this dawn feels different. The air is softer, carrying a whisper of thaw that smells faintly of wet earth. A single drop of water falls from the tippy smoke hole and lands on your cheek. You blink, half smiling. Winter is loosening its grip. The camp stirs with quiet energy. People emerge to greet the day, shoulders no longer hunched, steps lighter. The dogs bark lazily, their fur glistening with melting frost. A faint mist rises from the river nearby, where the ice has begun to fracture into glassy shards. You watch a boy toss a pebble, and it skips once before sinking something it couldn't have done a week ago. The elder notices too, murmuring, the water's breathing again. You think back over everything you've seen. The smoke-dyed hides, okay? The hot stones buried in furs, the rhythm of laughter and story. It all connects now. Surviving the cold wasn't just technique, it was philosophy. The tipi was never simply shelter. It was the embodiment of adaptability, community, and respect for balance. A mainstream historical fact. The conical shape of the tipi is mathematically brilliant. Its slanted walls reduce wind resistance, while the adjustable flaps create natural ventilation. When lined with hides and anchored in snow, it forms one of the most efficient portable homes in human history. Engineers today still marvel at how the design manages heat flow better than many modern tents. And yet, you realize the true genius of the tipi wasn't just its shape, was its soul. Built by hands that understood wind and fire like old friends, it turned the elements themselves into allies. You remember how the hides snapped like sails in the storm, how the smoke hole blinked open and closed like a patient eye. The tipi wasn't static, it breathed with its people. You wandered toward the river's edge, watching reflections of Tipis shimmer in the water. A small group gathers nearby, scraping hides on stretched frames, their laughter soft but steady. Someone jokes that they're tanning the sun back into the leather, and everyone chuckles. Joke number one simple, poetic. Cadia. Historians still argue whether the tipi's design evolved independently across tribes or spread through cultural exchange after horse trade networks flourished. Some say the Blackfoot refined it. Others credit the Lakota or Crow. You grin, thinking they'd probably all shrug and say, it doesn't matter who made it, just that it worked. Fringe Tippet floats up. Some elders claimed the tipi circular floor plan mirrored the universe itself. Sky above, earth below, fire at the center, family around it. The smoke rising through the tops symbolized prayers, connecting the physical and spiritual worlds. A house that was also a map of existence. You can't help but admire that elegance leaving inside your cosmology. Every night you sit for a while, tracing patterns in the softening snow. The sound of camp life continues behind you. A child's laughter, a distant drum, the rhythmic swish of someone sweeping ash. Life, you realize, is just layers of sound stitched together with warmth. The elder joins you, her face calm as the thawing river. She hands you a small cup of steaming broth, fragrant with sage and roots. You take a sip, it's earthy and grounding. You've learned, she says softly. You tilt your head. Learned what? Her smile is sly, not to fight the cold, to dance with it. You laugh, shaking your head. And here I thought I just learned to sleep without freezing. She chuckles. Joke number two and taps your forehead lightly. Same thing. The two of you sit in companionable silence, watching the mist lift from the plains. The land stretches endlessly, rolling and alive. It's hard to imagine how many winters it's seen, how many fires have burned on its surface. Maybe thousands, maybe millions. And still, every spring, it breathes again. A mainstream observation comes to mind. Early European settlers often marveled and sometimes mocked how cheerful native camps remained through brutal winters. They couldn't fathom the laughter, the songs, the games played in snowdrifts. But that was the secret weapon all along. Joy as insulation. You think of last night's drumbeat, the child's giggle, the elder's stories, okay? And realize that warmth was never just a physical state. It was emotional architecture. Historians still argue whether the Plains tribe's resilience came from adaptation, spirituality, or social cohesion. You suspect it's impossible to separate them. Fire burned in the hearth because belief burned in the people. The elder rises, brushing snow from her robe. "Come," she says, "help me thank the day." You follow her to a small clearing where she sprinkles sedge into a smoldering ember, letting the smoke rise. "For the night that didn't kill us," she murmurs. "For the morning that remembers us." You whispered the words with her, feeling their rhythm settle into your bones. You glance. If the sun is higher now, melting frost from the tippy poles until droplets fall like diamonds. The air smells of wet grass and smoke. The camp feels like a living organism awakening after hibernation. You feel awake too, in a way you haven't for a long time. The elder smiles again. "You'll go back soon," she says. "Back to your own kind of winter." You nod slowly. "I think I'll bring the fire with me," she laughs. Joke number 3. "Just don't burn your house down." You both laugh. The sound carried off by the wind, blending with the distant songs of people breaking camp again. Horses whicker. Dogs bark. Somewhere, a drum starts up a heartbeat, resuming its steady rhythm. And you realize, this is how they did it. How they survived without freezing. Not through brute endurance or endless suffering, but through balance, movement, and meaning. The tipi was just the stage. The real warmth came from within the stories. The humor, the unspoken trust that the world, however cold, was still alive and worth listening to. You take one last look at the camp smoke rising. People laughing, light glinting on river ice sand. You know, the secret isn't a mystery anymore. It's simple. They didn't fight the cold. They lived with it, learned from it, and carried its lesson in their bones. The fire dims 2 embers, glowing softly in the dark. Outside, the plains lie quiet beneath a thin veil of mist, the sky brushed with stars like faint candle flames. You lie back against your robe, listening to the last whispers of the camp, the slow creak of hides, the sigh of wind, the soft murmur of someone humming near the edge of sleep. Your heartbeat slows to match the rhythm of the world around you. The warmth in the tipi is gentle now, not blazing, but steady, like the calm breath before dreaming. You imagine the ancestors sitting by this same kind of fire hundreds of winters ago, spraying the same stories, smiling at the same jokes. The thought is oddly comforting proof that warmth doesn't end, it just changes hands. You take a long breath. The air tastes faintly of smoke and sage. You feel your eyelids grow heavy, the edges of thought melting into quiet. Somewhere outside, a coyote yips once, and the sound fades like a lullaby. The elder's words drift through your mind one last time. Thank the cold. It reminds you to be human, and as the tipi breathes gently around you, you do just that. You thank the cold for its lessons, the fire for its patience, okay, and yourself for staying present through it all. Now, let the warmth settle in your chest, soft and slow. Let your breath match the heartbeat of the plains. The night holds you, the stories hold you, the fire holds you. You are safe. You are warm. You are home.